Georgijs Ivanovs started the Ukraine Matters channel in 2007, and if my calculation is correct, it has already gained more than 44 million views, which is absolutely incredible and has a huge impact on the community that is supporting Ukraine. He started the channel to explain the situation surrounding the war against Ukraine in simple terms that everyone can understand. And anyone who's familiar with Georgi, and he injects passion, he injects anger, he injects emotion and authenticity into the videos, which of course is incredibly important. Like myself, he's not a military expert, but we are going to be talking about some of the military aspects of the conflict. Insofar as we're capable of doing that, and he has also been to Ukraine many times and seen almost the entire country, I think, except for the Odesa region, but I'll clarify that in a minute. And of course, he has a wide circle of friends and acquaintances in Ukraine, which I think is absolutely important to get that first-hand view of what is going on and what Ukrainians think about both the politics and, of course, the war culture and all the rest. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Thank you to everyone who supports the channel, especially at the moment. As many of you will know, we are continuing to do our program of events, and unfortunately these cost money, so there is a little bit of a begging bit here. We are going to be doing events in Oxford, Berlin, and then again in June in London, but the big ones are going to be held in Lviv, Kiev, and Odessa in May, later on in the second half of May. All these, of course, will be published onto the channel, but we do need your assistance, and I'm immensely grateful to everybody who has already helped out to make these a reality. Well, let's get into the conversation. Yori, welcome back to the channel. It's brilliant to see you again.
It's nice to see you, Jonathan. Yes, the loudmouth of the pro-Ukrainian community, so to say, selling the things that other people still keep thinking to themselves, trying to be more polite than factual. Oh, well, okay, everyone tries to be factual. It's just I'm a bit louder.
I think if we could put you and Jonathan M.S. Pierce together, we could have a loud off to see who could win that one. I'm not sure
Fair,
where my
fair,
bet would be on that.
fair
But
point. Fair point.
passion and authenticity is incredibly important, but you also go to great lengths to validate and verify your information. I think that's the other reason why your channel is so important. You don't put stuff out that is speculative, and I know that you do have a lot of conversations and do a lot of research to validate what you're saying.
Yes, I have a master's in economics and business administration, and obviously we had the topic on the research, the philosophy of science, and how do you do research, how do you validate data points. And I've been working with data, understand what good data, what bad data is, and so on. And that was kind of the main point for me starting. So validating the sources, I didn't even know the term because it's a journalistic term rather than the data term. And so I realized only later that yes, this is exactly what I was doing, just building up a good source flow for myself that creates good data, and kind of over time, it just created the workflow that I got. But I do try to keep my channel mostly, so to say, opinion based, because whenever someone says like, "Oh, let's talk facts and so on, let's discuss facts," I truly believe that it shifts the conversation into narratives about what fact is true, what kind of sources support this fact. I drop all of that. Yes, I do research. People that, like you said, know me, they also know that I do research. Sometimes when I say speculations, I would almost always explicitly say that this is a pure speculation. But I try to keep it as sort of like a conversation, opinion based, because I simplify things. I talk with people where they at. I don't try to be overly smart like a majority of the experts are. Um,
That's
with all respects to them, but sometimes like listening to a lot of them is like watching the paint dry, so to say.
I was going to say, I mean, you and I and those in this field, because we're consuming this information and watching other videos, other interviews, however long it is. I mean, I calculate recently, on the average, probably I spend about 10 hours a day at least thinking, writing, talking about this sort of stuff. You start to, I mean, I know it's a rational process of the brain. The brain is processing information, but you start to get a feel for who is not just authentic, but for who has unique and original sources, because you'll hear things that you haven't heard in other sources. You'll hear things that feel right, but you can then go and corroborate that with others. And unfortunately, there are many great experts out there, which is brilliant. Very few of them actually have that access to primary research or primary first-hand voices. Very few are actually doing their own research and overturning, mythologies. I mean, one that comes to mind is Jade McGlynn, who have endless respect for, and she's doing extraordinary research on the ground and talking to people at a scale which I think almost few other academics are doing. So, do you start to get that sense for when someone is like a gold mine source? And when they're just, another expert, they're doing a good job, but not necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily, go to them as a source for your information.
Oh, yes, I do, and thankfully my community does as well, and that's the most beautiful thing for me when I'm getting messages. Like I've heard this guy. It doesn't look like what you said. Does this sound right or not right? And I love it. I love when the people in my community, especially because we want to follow Ukraine, we want to follow Ukraine factually, and a lot of times we have the the BBC model and the issues of the BBC model, and is that there should be multiple perspectives on the war. So when we have like 9 sources say that Russians have not encircled Ukrainians around the Kursk region, and then we have one source that says that they have, in BBC model, those two facts basically are equally weight. In my perspective, that is a very clear hint that potentially that one source might be a bit biased. At least, definitely worth verifying.
And it's almost like a sort of, a steering wheel that tends to a particular direction. Over time, this balancing of information is going to lead to, bringing the whole information system off kilter. And I think in times where you don't have an actively malignant entity like Russia and perhaps to an extent China and others trying to poison the information environment, that sort of both sides can kind of work in the context of democracy when you don't have sort of viciously divided partisan politics with external actors pouring petrol on the flames. But we are in that situation, and I think that model is completely broken down. In fact, it's almost like it's like an immune system of body turning on itself, destroying itself.
Yeah, it's basically applying the same principles despite what is wrong. Like someone read first responded, not first responded, but like how to treat a wound manual by applying a plaster, and then someone up's arm got ripped off, and then he still tries to apply the plaster on the wound. That's kind of the same principle. It's like it's good at some circumstances, in other circumstances it's just wrong, and it seems that like majority of our media environment is still a kind of like, well, he's bloody his arm off. And there's like, no, it's not. So it's just a flesh wound. Let me apply that band-aid. So that's kind of the main point, and that's why I'm really happy to see that a lot of in our community, people have educated themselves. They are truly the vanguard. The unfortunate issue is that it's a very, very small community compared to like the major influences. So when someone like a president of a major country starts spouting nonsense, there's a lot more people listening to the person spouting nonsense rather than having the educated people that are actually in the know, so to say. So props for everyone that is watching this right now. Most likely they're not. You are more educated than 99.9% of your surrounding area.
And that's unfortunate, isn't it? Let's dive into a practical example of this because we have an ongoing, inverted commas, peace process, so-called negotiations. But actually, when you dive into it, it neither resembles any kind of traditional peace process that diplomacy in normal times would follow. It's much more of a sort of coercive, abusive process. It's much more of a, dare I say it, a sort of Potemkin facade. It's the illusion of negotiation. And even when that negotiation may or may not result in something, it doesn't really solve the underlying problems. All it does is potentially freeze the conflict, place a huge burden on Ukraine to surrender its assets and resources with no actual security. I mean, that's my cynical, opinionated view of it. But if you look at the way it's reported day by day, you can easily be sucked into the sound bites that convince you that this is a valid process when it seems to me that it's nothing but a sham, and it's a way of hiding what's really going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. There is no clear understanding what we are even negotiating. Who is negotiating what? What's the stance of Europe? Does Europe support and certain positions? Does it doesn't support? What are the positions? Because week after week we're hearing almost, if not diametrically opposite things, but at least like the changes are so wild that we just go from one thing to another, and then we go into the things that just absolutely doesn't make sense. Then we have, like, say Ukraine says these are absolute red lines and we would never cross them, to which then like suddenly we have the next week discussion. It was like, well, now we're proposing supposedly new deal that kind of goes over. It's a farce. It's a clown show. And my biggest problem is I can understand the Trump and Putin dynamic, right? I don't like it. I'm getting frustrated by it. It's fine. But what absolutely gets to my nerve is the dynamics of the European Union. And well, sorry, I'm talking about European Union because I am an European Union, but I mean the countries in Europe, like United Kingdom, obviously included, and other countries for whom that matters. It seems that this farce has started, and some people and politicians in Europe just kind of like decided, like, well, let's play along with this. And at first it started, let's maybe try to make sure we have some kind of relationship with United States while we're preparing ourselves, to now also receiving messages that supposedly Europeans are also again backing down on some of their security initiatives in favor of, like, maybe there is going to be a peace agreement that's going to be reached with Trump. It's like, are we having the memory of the goldfish? This is what I'm saying. I am annoyed to no extent and angry to no extent at the people that are supposedly in charge, that not just misreading the room. We're like far beyond that. We're 3 years into the 3.5 years in the most bloody war since the Second World War, and everyone is maybe hopefully preparing for the war that's going to be after it. And this one is just kind of like, well, the things happen. Let's just go with this. So the only thing that I'm a little bit like kind of measures down my tempo without going and lashing out like an attack mad dog at every single one of the statements of the European politicians is that we've had some of the commitments in some of the latest Ramstein meetings with regards to the weapon deliveries to Ukraine. Those have been pretty good. But again, not sufficient enough to, for example, substitute if United States, well, okay, I'm saying if, when United States is going to definitely pull out in support for Ukraine. Because the joke that is, not the joke, it's like the charade that everyone is pretending is that supposedly United States will continue supporting Ukraine if there is some kind of a ceasefire agreement or whatever. But Trump has done nothing in support for Ukraine. Like the only thing he done is basically nothing. Like all of the help that was delivered from United States is from the Biden administration. No new packages of aid are even closely to being discussed in the United States. So there is nothing that is coming to Ukraine from the United States that is going to be new. And the Europeans, we're still sleepwalking. We're still seeing politicians not doing what they're supposed to do. And I would even just briefly say it's like not raising up to the challenge. And then I was really hoping that we're going to see a bigger change to this. I'm definitely looking forward to May when Friedrich Merz is going to come in. His rhetoric has been pretty aggressive. I'm hoping that the actions will follow this rhetoric. But we're still seeing like the Merz's coalition party, the Scholz's party, they're still stating that, no, we shouldn't give Taurus missiles to Ukraine because that's going to be escalation.
And of course, saying we can't give them now because we wouldn't have any. And yet they stopped the production line. They didn't invest in any stocks. I mean, it's an absolute nonsense, whichever angle you look at it. The only positive, perhaps, is that under Scholz, they have revived some of the armament factories, and they will be producing multiple times more of shells, which are actually rolling off the production line than they were before. So it seems that certain things are slowly waking up. But as you say, overall, the picture is of a certain level of sort of delusion, false hope, and someone, I can't remember who this was. I didn't know it was Keir Giles. I saw an interview with Keir Giles and Edward Lucas, and he was saying this concept we have of labeling what Russia does as hybrid war. You got, components of aggressive war. You've got components of information. By compartmentalizing it, we're able to pretend that it's not aggression. It's not aggression focused on us. And we're able to say, well, the kinetic bit's against Ukraine, the information cyber is against us, but it's not a real war. His point was that in the Russian military doctrine, those distinctions are not made. They're all part of the same warfare. So the fact that we are already engaged on multiple fronts, just not necessarily the kinetic one with Russia, we keep kicking that can down the road. Russia already considers itself at war with us, with our societies, with our values, with its institutions, and we're just sticking our heads in the sand.
Yeah, this is clearly the most clear demonstration of this is the coalition of the lack of balls that is now trying to discuss the how they will send troops, and they stated that we're gonna send troops. We have the French, we have the British that we're gonna send there, and there's other countries, unnamed ones, but there are other countries, and we're gonna send troops, and we're gonna protect the east side of Ukraine while also strengthening the Ukrainian. Oh, sorry, we're gonna send to the west side, and then we're gonna strengthen the Ukrainian army to the east. Now it's been devolved into, well, maybe we're going to send some instructors to the east and there's going to be some air patrols that are going to be happening. But then if there is any kind of danger, then we're going to pull out. Thoroughly thinking that if that danger comes, it's just going to be more of the same. That Russia is just going to attack Ukraine rather than some of the European states going to be involved, and rather it's going to be a larger aggression with not just Russia, or Russia is going to be absolutely supported. The truth of the matter is, you said about we've a little bit invested into the production of the artillery shells. Well, that's great. The artillery shell is becoming very quickly very obsolete. The war is changing. The point of the matter is that if Russia would start rolling into the NATO countries, we would be in a situation where there would be tanks rolling into the cavalry units. And we are the cavalry. Because we think that we have these major precise weapons. We have these great super trained troops and so on. But all of these super trained troops cannot even understand or grasp the realities of the modern drone warfare. Ukrainian military, the fact that they're able to defend it, it's only because they understood the modern drone warfare. If Russians suddenly would decide to kind of just roll in, then we would have the shock of finding out that there is nothing we can really put against drones, that suddenly our politicians are not ready to conscript people and send them to the front lines just to kind of delay Russian advances, that our forces are slow, that our convoys are being destroyed nonstop, that any kind of vehicles, advanced technology and so on doesn't help if there is like 50 drones flying towards you. We would be in a situation where would be shock and awe, in a sense of Russians, shock and awe, just how quickly we would fall apart and how our precise weapons would be useless. There was a good saying that I heard saying is like, on any day of the week, European armies will beat Russian. The only requirement is being that there would not be a second week after that we would fight with. So that's pretty much the clear reality of where we are. The fact that Ukraine right now is doing the ultimate sacrifice, the bravery, the ability to conscript people and send them to die, is completely absent in our states. we're still seeing this as like, oh no, we cannot provoke Russia for any kind of conflict right now, or even after the fucking ceasefire that they said in the first place, sending in, instead of the armed forces that will protect the western flank of Ukraine or whatever, they're saying is like, we're gonna send some instructors and maybe some air surveillance. It's a joke. We're pathetic. Like, that is my problem. I want us to be strong. I want democracies to be strong. I want Russia to understand that they should not fuck with Europe. Instead, we're getting, oh, well, we don't want to upset Putin too much. He's a big, strong guy, It's like, we need to, like, and if there is at least one person of British origin or like other European origins that's going to die, well, that is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. And that mental barrier is just there.
And
But
yet
we're
we can
living in a
celebrate
different reality.
Ukrainians. I mean, this is
Correct.
this is borderline racism, even on the part of those who are pro-Ukraine. It's like it's right and noble and proper, and we laud Ukrainians, and it's extraordinary the sacrifice. But as you say, we don't make that mental leap to would we fight for those values? Would we sacrifice for those values? And that's an unanswered question at this point. And what's interesting, you said there about rhetoric. We've had very strong rhetoric from Merz. He's not in power yet, so of course we did no judgment until we see how he performs. We've had strong words from Macron, which is not entirely backed up by actions. Yes, France has sent some fantastic stuff over, and at various points in the last 3 years, their contribution has exceeded that of the UK, despite that's rarely sort of recognised. The UK has had very strong rhetoric, and we've done bits here and there, and we're quite good with the diplomacy on Trump. But at one point, Starmer's rhetoric was incredibly strong, and I've been told that his military commanders, who would I'm sure love to do more, they came to him and said, "You've just articulated a promise to whatever it is, protect the skies, provide this coalition of the willing. We have to tell you now, we don't have the equipment to do that. We don't have the resources. We don't have the skill. We don't have the numbers." At that point, it should trigger a deal of panic rather than investing to build up that capability, which I think Starmer now understands is missing. No, he withdraws the strong rhetoric and fudges it. So Britain is in the same place as I think, most of the other European countries west of Warsaw. They're just not taking this seriously through their actions, irrespective of what words they might come out with.
Yeah, the viability of a nation is defined by the willingness of the people of the nation to protect it, right? If there's people that are not willing to protect the nation, the values that the nation stands for, the same kind of goes for the union, the same goes for other things, and so on. We are supposedly in some kind of alliance where we said like not an inch is going to be given to Russia. Yet now this is all in absolute flux and question. And we need stronger leadership more than ever. We have some of the very, very strong leadership of like Ursula von der Leyen, but she's not a leader of the state. She doesn't have the mandate to lead. The same for Kaja Kallas. She's going out of her place. Like, she's being criticized in Europe a lot. There's a lot of people that are very unhappy with Kaja Kallas because she's doing job that they are not. And they're very unhappy because on her kind of background, they are looking like they're limp dick warriors.
It shows them up peripherally.
Yeah, exactly. Because Kaja Kallas comes out there with strong statements to condemn and actually say the right things, whereas some other countries would prefer is like, well, can you just shut up and like let it be and let it cool down and it will just gonna be fine if you just give the time, which is an absolute joke to our position to have.
And of course, just letting things pass by, there are real consequences. And one of those consequences, for instance, is, and we don't know really what's being done about this, if anything, and that is the frozen Russian assets, which have not been handed over in full. And we know a lot of them sit under jurisdiction of various bodies in Belgium. uh, and there's resistance to handing them over. And some countries have decided to hand it over, Britain, etc. Assets that under our jurisdiction are being handed over. And yes, there's the interest on that. But there's a crucial period coming this later this year in the summer where there is required a unanimous vote of European countries in order to not hand this stuff over, but simply to extend that mandate that allows it to remain frozen. If that's not dealt with, these funds cede back to Russia. They can then be used by Russia to bribe Trump, to invest in Russia, to invest in its war machine. This isn't just failure to support Ukraine, it's a failure to prevent massive advantage to Russia and its military intentions.
Yeah, we need to understand that right now between us fighting Russia and trying to survive, Belgians trying to fight Russia and survive, and everyone else, there is only Ukraine. There is only Ukraine. US is not there anymore. US is out. They're being very clear. So there is no one there. There is no one there. This is literally the last we're in there. And I mean, if those assets do go to Russia, in some absolutely wild scenario, which I mean, like I'm used to already wild scenario, but that would be, I mean, that is just suicidal. That is a pure suicide. That means like we have no right to exist by that moment. By that pay, like if we send the money to Russia and say like, oh, it's just because like we didn't have any legal basis to hold on to them, it's like you're done. Your country does not have the right to exist. You're selling off everything that you supposedly stands for. Since when the values became less important than the law? That is what I'm saying.
And even
For me,
survival. Since when did these bureaucratic, administrative barriers to action become more important than your survival of your country, your society, your identity? I mean, that's the ultimate question here. Do we want to continue or do we not?
yeah. So yeah, just to kind of wrap up this part of the topic, Ukraine is doing an incredible job. Like we're looking at Ukraine, we're looking at the way that they're fighting, and it's like, oh my God, this is so rudimentary. You know, they're fighting in trenches and so on. Everyone can do that. No, they can't. That is not the reality on the ground. And for anyone that has been on the front lines or at least closely interacted with and understanding how things actually operate, it's very, very complex. And whenever after that a person would interact with some of the European politicians or European defense analysts, can easily say that the people just live in like parallel realities, that they're living 70 years. There is this fundamental principle in a lot of minds and a lot of our Western powers, which is there is this foundational unshakability and like unbeatability that we can never be beaten, that we can never lose, that there is always going to be some kind of continuation. It might be a bloody war, but the good some kind of is going to win in the end. The good doesn't win by default. The good wins when there is work to be done. The point of the matter is that after the Nazi Germany fell, we paid the ultimate price, insane price that should never been ever be paid. And we're right now looking down the barrel of the same situation, except we don't need to die. Like we literally just need to get out of this on the cheap. Just hold the assets, send more money to Ukraine, just pay a little bit of the money. But we're like, nah, it's good.
Not even doing that. And we also have the evidence. And you say, we assume that we will never be overrun. Well, Eastern Europe and the Baltics were overrun and enslaved for more than 50 years. Not only are we forgotten that an entire part of, advanced European civilization with, let's say, certainly in the Czech Republic, some of the most advanced engineering and sort of advanced production facilities, they fell into the hands of the Soviet Union for that period and lived under oppressive, tyrannical, brutal primitive Russian world kind of principles. Yes, it's the Soviet Union, but it's very similar to what we're seeing in occupied territories at the moment. We forget that this has happened repeatedly through history, and it's happened in recent history and memory. And we have no understanding of what it's like to live under occupation, especially, I would say, the irrational, highly traumatic occupation of Russia. I mean, this is going to sound horrific, but unless you're in a target group, such as Jew, Gypsy, etc., being occupied by the Russians in some ways is less predictable and more brutish than it was under German occupation for some people in some places during that period. I've actually been to villages in Russia, spoken to people who were old enough, this is going back subway, spoken to people who were actually in areas and it directly experienced being occupied by Germans. And in particular, the story struck me. This old woman who you'd expect to loathe and hate the Nazis. She was like, "Oh no, they treated us quite kindly, and they allowed us to publish our local village newspaper, and we could actually trade our butter and do this, that, and the other." I just found these stories extraordinary. Not much sense of hate and loathing, just this description. But when the Red Army swept back through, yeah, that's when you have real trouble. So people might be horrified at that, but I think it's sort of these first-hand accounts are interesting. We do not and should not want to fall under the auspices of the Russian world. It is Orwellian in its cruelty.
Yeah, my family was there under my family migrated to Latvia during the end of the 19th century. So we were there during the first Latvian Republic in the Baltics. We came under the Russian occupation after that, and there was a lot of impacts like during the times. We were fortunate enough because apparently we had like some of the blood that was traced to the Russian mainland, so there was a little bit more leniency, which was not really given to a lot of the locals. Plus, I come from a working class family. Like my granddad, he was a cobbler, so it's not really like a like intellectual class that really was targeted by the Stalin and his regime. We were lucky, but like I'm not ready to bet luck for the modern age. Like I don't like casinos. I don't like to gamble, and gambling with the whole future is definitely not my style at all.
Definitely not. So Ukraine's in a difficult position because we have these sort of fictitious, I say, highly abusive and coercive so-called negotiation processes. The US saying, look, Ukraine, you have to accept things not only that they don't like, but things which are directly opposed to apparently the values of Western democracy and indeed international law, recognizing Crimea as Russian sovereign territory, and many other things which are not just unpalatable, which have no chance whatsoever of passing the Verkhovna Rada, which would be a required step to place them into law. At some point, and maybe that point has already happened, do Ukrainians look at this and just say, well, you know what? Fighting is the least painful thing. Fighting on actually is less destructive to the integrity of Ukrainian statehood than actually agreeing to what the US is trying to impose on us.
No, absolutely, and obviously it's going to depend on like how Zelensky is going to be communicating. The Ukrainians might be tired. Like I've been to Ukraine just recently. Ukrainians might be tired. There is no this passionate fight that was there during a couple of years, but no one is willing to just give up to Russia, to surrender to Russia. It seems people are definitely looking like if there is some kind of break, like some kind of status quo with some security benefits, then like I feel that Ukrainians might be looking, especially because they're seeing just how weak the support of the allies is, and they're basically understanding that they're stuck to fight the Russians all there alone. But the issue with Crimea and recognizing some of their territories is even worse than just that it's not going to pass Verkhovna Rada, or it's just betrayal and suicide, political, or might not even be political for Zelensky, because that's like not a very popular, to say the least. But the most important thing is it's a model. It's a model that basically signs off that there is going to be a future invasion of Ukraine. Because think about it this way: what does this teach us, Russia? It's like if you control some territory for long enough time, and then maybe you need to start like some additional war, small war, or kind of relatively war that everyone is going to be annoyed. Then if you stick up in the war for a long enough time, then people is just going to recognize the territory that you took absolutely illegally as yours. More importantly, Donald Trump is also proposing to lift off the sanctions, including the sanctions that was there on Russia for occupation of Crimea. So if basically you stick in long enough, then everyone is just going to cave. So now Russia is going to be left with de facto control of parts of the four regions inside of Ukraine and Crimea. And therefore, if Crimea gets recognized now, then there is just a pure incentive to just start the war again, because then the four regions are going to be recognized for Russia, right? Because that is the pattern that we're introducing. And I'm not even going to talk about the patterns that might appear everywhere else in the world. You know, it's like, oh, China can just get Taiwan very easily. I mean, that's already kind of almost like guaranteed. But then we can talk about like the India, Pakistan conflict that is right now spiraling a little bit. We can talk about additional Middle East. We are fully returning to the age of empires, the might made right. And there is no oversight. There is no parties, the big powers that act responsibly. War and bloodshed and suffering is what awaits us. And that Pandora's box has been unleashed by, I'm going to say, the Biden slipdick approach to timidly try to cooperate with Russia. We right now already are looking down the very much worse world. The problem is that for now, for a lot of people, it still feels far away and it's not going to touch them. But I'm not going to return to that topic. We covered it extensively.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing that I'm sure you've been picking up on is the emerging rhetoric that we're hearing now from not just Russian propagandists, because you know it's interesting listening to what they say, but until it starts getting repeated by, let's say, so-called Russian politicians, Peskov and others, it's something we maybe, it's an early warning, but not necessarily something that's imminent. But there's a rising crescendo of using this term Eurofascism, and in even talking about a Moscow-Washington axis to tackle this so-called emerging Eurofascism. Now it's translated in different language when we hear it from sort of MAGA sort of loudmouths. But we're hearing this incredibly loudly from Moscow. And this same kind of, Nazi label was exactly the kind of stuff that we heard prior to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So have you been sort of following the rise of this? And how concerned are you about this sort of labeling of Eurofascism perhaps being a precursor to a full-fronted attack on the EU?
I think this is more of like a nuanced approach. I think like let's just say I don't think that anything changed for Russia. Like I think they just want to kind of introduce new positioning topics so to align themselves closer with the Trump's administration. And the fact that the Europeans are the fascists, well, I mean, like I'm from the Baltics. We've been nominally more fascist than Ukrainians for a while now, until Ukrainians became more fascist, and now apparently it's also the Europeans are fascist until they will not be fascist. It's all fluid. It's all basically whatever they're gonna say, whatever it is they're needed for the specific time and frame. I think that the situation is clear enough in my perspective, and it's mostly just semantics.
Before we started recording, as an extension to that, how imminent or not is potentially a threat to the Baltics and the Suwalki Gap? And if this is something that Putin is minded to do, will he try to make sure that NATO is fully turned into a zombie institution, that the US is fully dysfunctional and possibly withdrawn from any concept of defending Europe, or is making such a move, too risky for Putin, who, prior to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, has actually been shown to be quite hesitant and cautious about making decisive decisions.
I mean, you said it yourself that there is a lot of disagreement inside of the alliance, that there is already potentially not that 100% confidence in some of the allies, but also the part of the war, the propaganda warfare, the hybrid warfare. For Russia, as you said, they don't really distinguish whether this is is a hybrid war or not. Like the aggression is aggression, and this is part of their common doctrine, and they're going to be acting on it. So it's definitely going to be a threat. Will the Baltics be aware? Yeah, it's like every single person that kind of follows the situation in the Baltics understand one very simple message: we're next, and that is not even being really discussed. That's what a lot of them are considering helping Ukraine because Russia is going to come for us next, and everyone understands this. I think Suwalki Gap is, as if we're looking like local tactical level, Suwalki Gap is understood to be a weakness inside of our tactics. So there is already like countermeasures. But I think the biggest problem for any countermeasures to be triggered, one of the biggest countermeasures that I've heard of, for example, is that Poland, with the air support from the Sweden, will just invade and take over Kaliningrad right away. So there is like no gap then. It's like, yes, Russia might try to go towards Suwalki Gap where there's a lot of mines and so on, but if there is no Kaliningrad, there is nothing to essentially link with. Then you just get into the regular fighting situation, and that is kind of the countermeasure. But with that countermeasure, the question will be is like, when the push come to shoves, will the politicians send that signal to the military that it's a go, like the aggression of Russia has started, we need to go? Because remember, if Russia doesn't distinguish between hybrid aggression and a real kinetic aggression, so they are already working on destabilizing us and getting rid of the Baltics pesky loud-mouthed dogs like myself. But if there is some kind of like, oh, until they start firing or until they invade our territory, it's not an aggression, then we're still living in a delusion world. And we're circling back to the whole point of what I say. We are thoroughly dependent on Ukraine for our defense right now. I mean, the Baltics. So that's why the support for Ukraine is absolutely, I want to say mainstream, but it's an understatement of the century to say that it's mainstream from the Baltics.
And we also seem to be deluded another way, which is, and this is a very, very simple phrase, very simple idea, but unfortunately it seems to have some relevance here. Not only are we not organizing our own defense and getting serious about it, we continue to defer to the US. At first, I was hoping that that was just a sort of facade, and there's lots of action behind the scenes just to keep the US distracted while we get on with doing other things that need to be done. I rather now fear that we are still deferring to the US when it's quite clear that the US has mentally and strategically withdrawn, and soon it may materially withdraw from European security and support. Yeah, maybe they'll leave some troops in Hungary, and that's also very telling, as it were. The least European country, the most corrupt. More so than Ukraine, actually, if various indices are to be believed. Europe is not at the table. It's not been invited at the negotiation table. And if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, as one of my recent sort of panelists explained. Do you see this as another delusional problem?
I mean, yes, that is the whole point. When the who is it, JD Vance comes out and says we're not going to be protecting Europe. I think we're estimating our defensives and so on in Europe, and then we have European Mark Rutte in NATO coming out with the clown show saying, "Oh no, no, NATO is doing totally fine. We're fully committed to our defenses." Or like politicians coming out and saying, "No, no, no, the transatlantic union has never been stronger. We have very special relationships between the Americans and our countries." I mean, it cannot be taken seriously. Like, I don't know who it should convince. Maybe it convinces people that don't follow this at all, that are following, TikTok trends or just want to live their normal lives and they don't consider geopolitics at all. But for absolutely anyone inside of this space, it is absolutely clear that these people are, well, they're not even pretending, but they're joking. They are completely in a parallel reality. And I say, like, there was seemingly a push, like the Ursula von der Leyen's EU 800 billions defense package, major pushes towards reinforcing our defense. And it was great. But now we're hearing that supposedly because there is already discussion on some of the ceasefire, then countries are considering scaling back, then some of the countries will not hit even the 2% target this year for defense spending. Do we have the right to exist?
When you put it like that, it's a very challenging way to put it, but it not perhaps incorrect. And again, this idea of deterrence, and not just deterrence, because I think Putin is not really deterred from traditional deterrence or nuclear deterrence anymore, because he doesn't believe that we will use those in our own defense, even if we are being invaded. But there is a sense that east of Warsaw, well, west of Warsaw is the concept there. But if you look at the Baltics, Nordics, Warsaw, there is a much clearer understanding of this, and we see the action in military rearmament. The big challenge, though, of course, is that the US at the moment is a blockage to sensible processes, but it could flip even further. It could actually robustly interfere to prevent Europe, to pressure Europe into not defending itself against Russia. This is the nightmare scenario. And for some of us who tend towards the idea and have done for a while that Trump is more than just working towards the benefit of Russia, more than just an apprentice of Putin or in awe of tyrants, that there's something more there, something perhaps sort of coercive or deeply corrupting that means he's actually siding with Russia, then the logical conclusion of that is that he will interfere to stop Europe from defending itself against a Russian invasion. That's going to sound alarmist, but surely it's something we need to prepare for.
Yeah, absolutely. And with regards to deterrence, I have a great story, not a story, but like a explanation made by the Estonian Minister of Defense, Hanno Pevkur. I've been seeing his speech recently, and he stated the misunderstanding of deterrence of Russia and how Russia operates, and how a lot of people in the Western Europe are misunderstanding this, is that imagine you're in a bar and then it so happens that maybe like you liked some kind of girl or whatever, and just imagine the situation, and then you suddenly get into a bar fight with a Russian due to this girl, and so the situation heats up a little bit. The Russians will always strike first. So while you're still considering what to do, while you're still looking around, thinking how you can de-escalate the situation, you're just going to get slapped in the face by a fist from a Russian. After which you're going to grab your face, and then you're going to start, whoa, take it easy, fella. Maybe let's try finding a way like how to, and then you get struck the second time. And that is basically deterrence with Russia and the Western approach to deterrence to Russia in a nutshell. The only way to deter Russia is not either not get struck at all or strike first, or at least after you got the first strike, which we did by this point, then at least strike back. And we're right now in this moment of, we already got struck, like our cheeks are hurting. We are already paying some of the price for being not properly defended against Russia. We allowed the war, the full-scale war, to happen despite the Russia showing their cards, aggression, taking over Crimea, breaking every single international law, so to say, in the book, putting a whole joke to our democratic project. And now we're having this cheek reddened by Russia. We are still trying to communicate, trying to explain that things maybe are not as bad and so on. And the question is, will we strike back, or are we waiting for that second finishing blow? And that is kind of like the defense paradigm in a nutshell. And as for can there be a worsened alliance between Russia and the United States? I mean, yeah, absolutely. Like Trump, unfortunately, I have some optimism, and this is my speculation. I was really afraid about Trump coming to power because Trump is very clearly an autocrat. Now, obviously, there is like pro-Trump commentators that are going to say I'm just a communist, lefty, whatever, stating. But again, I'm a European, so from your position, everyone here is communist. So how do you know? So Trump is definitely an autocrat. He likes autocrats. He likes Putin. He wants to be Putin. He wants to have unchecked forces. The issue is US has a lot of these checks and balances. And we can see that Trump really tried to challenge a lot of that power as he came into office. The first 50 days were a nightmare. Like it was unchecked power, overwhelming, going everywhere. So there was Dodge, there was going into internal politics, there was the tariffs, there was a lot of other things. There was the Ukrainian proposition of pulling all of the aid, stopping support for Ukraine, everything, all of that. But what we saw is there is a huge whiplash right now coming for Trump. So the courts that are going against him, the system is fighting back. The people that are resisting it, there is a push from the Europeans, there is a push from Ukrainians to his push. So all of his brash decisions right now got a whiplash and they're contracting backwards. And I was afraid that Trump will be like a very serious autocrat. But very serious autocrat is smarter. Very serious autocrat understands that what he needs to secure before he gets into any kind of confrontation with anyone is he needs to erode the apparatus of elections. He needs to make sure that he gets elected next time. That is primary, because while you're dismantling democracy, you need time. And to do that time, you need to make sure that you can get reelected. Either it's by making like J.D. Vance as a president, and then Trump getting in as a vice president, and J.D. Vance abdicating the throne by that moment. So stuff like that. Unfortunately, because he has been so brash, and there has been this wild reaction to what he's doing right away, I feel that he has not built enough favor to now enact these changes. So my hope, and this is my hope, it's not given, but it's at least like some ray of light of hope, that because of his incompetence and that he wants to put like fingers in all of the honey jars right away, then he is basically sabotaged his potential authoritarian turn for USA. But I'm still kind of like, while hopeful, I am still a little bit pessimistic just because there's still like more than 3 years to go.
There's plenty of time for him to double down. And yeah, there's an episode I'm doing next week. It's taking quite a long time to write, but it's looking at what are the transitional features of an autocracy and what are the established features. Because I think we often make the argument, and I make this mistake myself with American friends who tend to look more on the positive side, and will be arguing as if the US is already an established autocracy, and they'll be like, it's not, and they'll push back hard against that. We don't make the distinction between the transitional features and the established features of autocracy. So I'm making a sort of a bingo card that will help to distinguish it, because it's very alarming seeing how many of those transitional features are already in play. But it's not entrenched clearly, which again, if we look at it, I think rationally, gives us some optimism. It also gives us a plan of action to sort of track these things and fight back. The last area we're going to focus on, because I know we're sort of running out of time now, is on the evolution of drone warfare. And we had a good conversation before we started record. And again, it seems to me that whereas there's a lot of delusion about NATO, its effectiveness, and let's say institutional bias and delusion, pretending it is no longer, it's not a zombie organization, which I think it probably is in terms of taking action. There is also a delusion that we're far better prepared to tackle drone warfare than we are, that we understand a lot more than we do. And even though we may have some technical capabilities, these aren't really trickling down into strategic and tactical thinking, training, and they're not at scale. And we don't have the sort of, I would say, the procurement processes or even the communication between our tech sectors and the military, and we don't have that civil society component, which of course is the cement, the glue, or the oil in the machine, whatever you want to call it, that has actually enabled Ukraine to implement all this stuff. How do we tackle this? Because unless we tackle this, then we underestimate massively the capability that Russia has to use those drones at scale against us.
Yes, I think for the drone warfare, the biggest challenges are not actually material because drones are not that expensive to make. They're relatively simple. There is plenty of companies that are producing drones. There can be this kind of, as you say, social component of people assembling drones, printing drones. I think we would have these technical capabilities up and running relatively fast. I think we could get, maybe we don't have the mass right now, but there are already some factories producing drones also in European Union and other states. I don't think that's the issue. I think the biggest issue and the most dominant one is that the understanding of the drone warfare, that is what missing. We're missing people that are flying drones. In a lot of our militaries, flying drone is still not even considered, or maybe considered there should be specific fire teams. Whereas in Ukrainian military, it's basically like almost like everyone needs to know how to fly a rudimentary drone. That is almost a given, and that requires us to first and foremost exchange the learning methods. Maybe consider, like, for people that are part of the territorial defense forces or National Guard forces in different states, to change that they get trained on how to fly drones, how does targeting on the drone works, and so on. That's a skill that needs to be learned, and we need people that know how to do this mechanically. After that, we get on a higher level of what is needed is the understanding how drone units and drone operators integrate as part of the military. Right now, our military is not integrated with drone. We're going to hit the same wall that Ukrainians hit with the drones when they were just introduced, that there was drones separately, people that are fighting on the ground or whatever else separately. Now there has been like a lot of melding on both sides. And while, for example, Danes are ready to send some of the units to learn how to fight these drones, we have, as a big armies like that, would we work together as a coherent units, we do not have drones as an integrated part of our operations. That is a much bigger challenge to overcome because that requires a reform of tactics and operational guidance, like how do we wage war. And then finally, on a more of a strategic level, right, we still don't understand how to fight longer range drones. How do we fight a lot of our air defenses, like even airplanes and everything? They're really good at shooting down, like when there is like a missile, 10 missiles, 20 missiles, and so on. But we're going to hit the same challenge as Ukraine hit. We don't have enough air defenses to fight when there is also like 100, 200, 300 drones in the air. What is going to be our answer? Right now, there is like one drone that's flying into Poland and they're struggling to shut it down. What about if there is like 300 drones that are flying in? How are you going to defend that? And because our factories are not like Ukrainian factories that are distributed all across the country in smaller basements, does your house have a basement? Well, probably like if that's an older house, like maybe Second World War, it is. But in Denmark, finding a house with a basement, that's actually interesting because a lot of modern projects they don't have a basement. They have never planned for a basement. That is an issue. We have unprepared infrastructure. We have unprepared systems to fight the countermeasures. We have unprepared battle capabilities. No, we don't have prepared operators even. There is so much work that is from where we are now to what is the efficient way to resist Russians and at least at the same level as they do.
Well, this is an area we're going to dig into, I think, a lot more because also we would struggle with our procurement processes, keeping up with the innovation cycles that are required, where drones that would have been delivered in, say, January are now not fit for purpose at all, and they may have gone through two or even three iterations of the hardware, the software, the tactics, the techniques, and the training cycles. We're clearly not geared up for any of that or for the data sharing that's required at speed and scale. Not impossible, but we're not putting in the preparatory foundations for that yet, and it's going to be very expensive to do so. Well, we'll pick up all of that because I know you'll have some sort of strong experiences and opinions on all of those. For now, though, just a reminder that we have got the fundraisers going for trucks, Car for Ukraine, and anyone who's interested in doing something practical, check out those links, contribute, help to buy sort of trucks, 4x4s that can be converted, which are absolutely essential for Ukraine at the moment. Link in the description. We're both in that campaign, so we'll put both our links there. For today, though, it's been a massive pleasure speaking again. Let's do this again soon. There's never a shortage of things to discuss, and your passion, energy, and directness is definitely something that we need at this time.
Thank you, Jonathan, and everyone that is still sticking up with this. Thank you so much. I love you, and I'll see you next time.
See you next time.